I'm with John Lynch. He's a ghostwriter, a freelance writer, and he's written historical fiction and contemporary fiction novels. I can't wait to interview him, and we're going to have a good time. All right, John. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. And Richard, and you?
I'm doing fantastic. It's a little early for me over here in the States, but
yes, I'm sorry about that.
It's no worries. I probably needed to get up and do things anyway, sometime.
Yeah, well, I tend to get up about 4 o'clock every morning, so it's my creative time will be running out just in the next couple of hours, and then I'll go for a walk.
I see. Yeah, I tend to move more towards the evening. So
Yeah.
I go to bed about 2 in the morning, so I'm just going to sleep when you're getting up.
Right, yeah.
All right, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, okay. Something I've often wondered about is whether anybody knows when they've left childhood behind.
It's a good question.
How they came, well, no, when they've left childhood behind, does anybody know how they came, what happened in that childhood, how they came to be what they are? Because I'm not sure that I do. But I'll tell you what I can. I've always said that in the UK, my generation was the luckiest generation. We were the first generation and almost the last generation to have whatever education our brains entitled us to free of charge, to be able to take advantage of that. We also had free healthcare, and when I was a child, which was a long time ago, when I was a small child, I was taking orange juice and cod liver oil delivered by the government. I can't say I enjoyed the cod liver oil at the time, but I think it probably did a good job. Those who came before me, on one side they were miners, coal miners, and on the other side they were agricultural labourers, straw cutters, brickyard workers, people like that. But I was the most intelligent person I ever met was my grandfather. And I say intelligent, I don't mean clever. You have to have an education to be clever. And he went down a coal mine when he was 12 years old, and that was the end of that. My mother won a scholarship to go to a grammar school, but she couldn't take it up because they couldn't afford to have her not working. And in fact, they had 2 new children that she had to look after. So when it came to me, and this is why I say we were the lucky generation, when it came to me, I also passed a scholarship, won a scholarship to go to grammar school, and I was able to go. And when I look back, all these people, agricultural labourers, miners, what they most valued was education, and they drove you and drove you. My birthday presents, Christmas presents were always books. And they used to say, work hard, study. If you don't, you'll end up down the pit. And that was the last thing they wanted. And so I came, I suppose, into a world where books represented real life, and to me they still do. I don't know whether that's an answer to your question. But it's a weird attitude. I know that books represent real life, but that's how I see it. And it was, it was a hard time for them, my parents. But it wasn't as hard as it had been for their parents, and for them it wasn't as hard, etc. And we could go back. It's one of the reasons I write historical fiction. And when I write historical fiction, I don't write about lords and ladies. I don't write about aristocrats. I write about the people at the very bottom of the heap.
Why did you choose to write about the common people rather than the aristocrats?
I think because I found them more interesting. I actually put a video on YouTube about this called Knobs or Nobodies. It's much harder. You have to do a lot more research to find out about the kind of people I'm talking about, and what their lives were like, because what history records, of course, is the big figures. I did find out one or two things about antecedents of mine who went to Australia, for example. Actually, before they went to Australia, some of them went to America, and they went on boats which they had not paid the fare, and going to America and then to Australia was not their choice. But you can. I've spent ages in places like Durham, in the records office, the archives, the historical archives, and if you go through the documents that are there, forget about the big histories written by big people about big people. You go through the parish registers, for example, and the notebooks that rectors kept. There's all sorts of information about these people. You have to look, but it's there. And I think that, you know, just in surviving, they probably achieved more than the son of some landed family did in going to war.
That's fascinating. So what are your books about? Tell me about your books.
Well, I'm a ghostwriter, as you said. So when I ghostwrite, my book is really about whatever the publisher wants it to be about. But when I'm writing in my name, for the historical fiction that I write in my name, actually I write it as R.J. Lynch, which is my initials in reverse. That's what I do for historical fiction. I'm writing about the 18th century. I'm writing at the 1760s, 1770s. And of course, if you're American, something big happened around about that time. And the early books in the series are about the poor of the parish of Wrighton in County Durham, and how much worse life is for them when the enclosures come in, for example, and how they are treated by their betters. The third book in the series, which hasn't been published yet, but it will be the start of next year, is actually set in America, because two of these guys escaped to America. They're not going because the state has sent them. They're going to get away from a false accusation. And so they're there at the time of the War of Independence. And if you're American and you look at what is going on, I'm not going to get into political discussions, but you look at what's going on now and you read some of the nonsense that gets blasted around Facebook, you might have a particular view. But for me, what happened in America in the 1770s is still the turning point of the free world. It's the self-healing democracy. And without it, the rest of the Western world will be an infinitely worse place than it is. And the seeds for that were laid then. I question whether Americans actually understand how lucky they were to have George Washington as their first president, a man who could have been president for life and who, when his term was up, just said, no, I'm going back to the farm.
I know it's a fascinating story. I've read a lot about the American Revolution. Yeah. And I don't think that many Americans or even people in the world realize what really happened there and who was who. Mm. Well, what motivated you to write that kind of book?
Do you know, I can't answer that, Richard. I can't. I have no idea what. It's one of the questions, isn't it? You must get it. I get it. You must get it. Where did you get your idea from? And the only answer I have to that is I have no idea. Because when I'm writing contemporary fiction, for example, I wrote a coming of age book about a young English lad called The Making of Billy McAlean. And when I wrote the first sentence of that book, I had no idea what I was going to write. And I sat down right here in this room at this desk, and I typed out the words. All I'd said was, I wouldn't mind seeing her in her knickers. And I looked at it and I thought, where the hell did that come from? And I had no idea. And over the next few months, Billy McAlane, the subject of the book, stood right here, looking over my left shoulder. And he said, Poppy wouldn't have said that. We didn't do it like that. Don't forget the anger management. And this is a story I was making up. And yet a character was telling me what to write. I know, I do understand that, that makes me sound as though I'm insane, and perhaps I am. But that's how it works. So where the idea for that book came from, I don't know. I have no idea.
Interesting. Yeah, I know the same phenomenon. My books tend to write themselves. I'm not one of those people who intricately does the plot.
Yeah. And you have to keep writing, because you need to know what happens.
Yeah, I'm just as fascinated as my readers when I write. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have a vague idea of what the ending might be.
I get that round about the 30,000 word mark. I start to think, I think I see where this is going.
All right. Do you have any tips for writers to help them succeed?
Do I have any tips for writers? Yes, I do. The first would be, look, it seems like a great idea, doesn't it? You're going to be a writer. You're going to be your own boss. You're going to sit like I'm sitting and you're sitting, and it seems like a great idea. And actually, if there's anything else you could conceivably think of doing, do that instead. All right, because it's hard. But if you are determined to do it, and I can't imagine anybody doing anything else, and you probably can't, I would say get rid of any thoughts you might have of entitlement. The fact that you've written a book does not mean you're entitled to have anybody read it. Get rid of any false ideas of what you can do, but above all, read and read and read. And while read everything. Read voraciously and catholically. But I've got a book in that bookshelf there, and by Francine Prose, called How to Read Like a Writer. I don't know whether you've come across it. And I would say anybody who wants to be a writer, while you're reading everything you can get your hands on, I'm talking about books, I'm not talking about cornflake packets. While you're reading everything you can read, also read Francine Prose, because then you will start to read like a writer and to think, oh, yeah, I see how they did that, so that your technique will improve. Expose yourself to editors, not your mother and your sister, real editors. And when they tell you everything that's wrong with the book, listen to them. Don't close your mind. Listen to them. And bear in mind that George Orwell, who was immensely successful eventually, when he started to write, people howled with laughter. The guy was utterly incompetent, probably far more incompetent than I've ever been, or anybody watching this podcast has ever been. He was useless. And I've seen examples of what he wrote, so this isn't just people talking. He really was useless. But he worked at it and he worked at it and he worked at it. And that's what you, the would-be writer, have to do. And I'd also say, people are going to say to you, write about what you know. Well, look, I spent a large part of this morning writing about France in the late 18th century as they approached the French Revolution, all right? I know nothing about it. Forget about write what you know, but write about what you know about how people act, how people operate, what makes people do what they do. You do know emotions, you do know how ideas are processed, so include that, but forget about write what you know. It's one of the worst pieces. pieces of advice I've ever been given. And have we got time for one more?
Oh, we got plenty of time.
Okay, well, if I look up here in this room where I work, if I look straight up there, there's a picture of a great moment in a game of international rugby, but we'll skip over that. But up here is a print that I brought back from the Prado in Madrid. And it's the picture of the young Prince Balthazar on horseback by Velasquez. And the reason I keep that, the reason I bought that print and keep it there instead of somewhere else in the house, is because there are times, I'm a writer, and there are times when I cannot do what I want to do. I don't have the technique, I'm not good enough. And Velasquez was one of the finest painters the world has ever known. Take a look at his picture of Prince Balthazar on horseback. The picture of Prince Balthazar is wonderful, but Velasquez couldn't paint horses. And I find that reassuring sometimes, that I look at something and I think, you know, there are things I can't do. Well, he was one of the best who ever lived, and there were things he couldn't do either.
Interesting. All right, what's your favorite thing about being an author?
I think the ability it gives you to play God. I was talking about this thing that I'm writing. I'm ghostwriting it actually, but it's, you know, it's set in it's in the lead up to the French Revolution. Some of my characters are going to die by the guillotine. They don't know that, but I do. And in one or two cases, I have the ability to spare them. Whether I will or not, I haven't yet decided.
Interesting. How do you promote your books?
Well, of course, the ones I ghostwrite, and I ghostwrite more than I write in my own name, the ones I ghostwrite are somebody else, the publisher promotes those, because I'm not even I'm not allowed to say that I even wrote them, except in a couple of cases. I find, I mean, first of all, always have one or two of them with you. And something else that I like to carry things like this around. This is it's a glossy that I had done on one of my books, and I have them on all of my books, and I carry them around with me. So if I'm on a train and somebody is you have to put yourself out there. If I'm on a train and someone is reading, I will say, do you like to read? And if they say yes, I'll say, here's a book that you might find interesting. Don't give them the book, give them the thing about it, right? I've stopped in car parks on motorway service stations and chatted to the guy standing by the car next to me. And he says, where are you going? And I say, well, I'm going to a literature festival, for example. Oh, are you a writer? Yes, you know, and sell him a book that you happen to have in the boot, in the trunk. Okay, but sell him, don't give him. And I just mentioned literary festivals. You need to work hard to get yourself invited to those, because they're a great way to meet people who are interested in books, because most people aren't, and people who are in the mood to buy one. But other than that, I've tried. I mean, I have a mailing list. I have I have 3 different blogs. I work hard at those. I have found Twitter gets me lots of retweets, but it doesn't sell anything. Facebook absorbs a lot of money, but for me, it doesn't sell anything. I know it works very well for some people, but it doesn't work for me. Amazon's own marketing works very well for me. But I can't promise that that's going to be true for everybody. I mean, a very good friend of mine sells an enormous number of books through Facebook, and he does it very well. I have never been able to pull that off.
Yeah, I haven't either.
No, and it can cost you a lot of money.
It does indeed.
Which is fine if it's working.
Exactly. Do you get writer's block, and what do you do about it when you do?
I don't think, look, you're a ghostwriter too, and I don't think ghostwriters get writer's block because you've got a deadline. You know, it has to be written. So I'm not sympathetic towards writer's block, to be perfectly honest with you. If somebody says they're blocked, I may not say it, but what goes through my mind is, for goodness sake, get hold of yourself, right? Get over yourself. Get on with it. Sit down, lay brick. If you can't think of anything else to do, just lay brick. Write something. Decide what should happen next and write it. And if it doesn't work, delete it. But get on with it. I'm not. You're a ghostwriter.
I am.
You write a book for a publisher. You promised the publisher that it will be in the publisher's hands by next Tuesday. The publisher drops you an email to say, getting a bit nervous, how are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm not going to make it for next Tuesday. I might not make it for another month because I'm blocked. What's the publisher going to say? And is he ever going to turn to you again? No. So I don't think ghostwriters get writer's block.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about your ghostwriting. How's that work?
Well, it takes time to be established as a ghostwriter, as I'm sure you know. But now I have 3 or 4 publishers that I write for. They know the kind of thing I can do, and I write non-fiction and fiction. They know the kind of thing I can do, and they know the kind of thing I'm not good at. And they come to me from time to time and say, we've got this, we want this. There's one publisher for whom I write a series. The author's name that appears on the front is well known, and it would probably amaze many of that author's fans to know that actually the well-known author doesn't exist. Don't tell me you haven't come across this, because you have.
I have.
Yes, I thought so. And you know, somebody said to me the other day, isn't that cheating? And I thought, well, why is it cheating? You know, people want something that's good to read. I'm giving them something that's good to read. The publisher is there for the marketing. What the publisher is very good at is promoting this book or promoting this series. And the publisher needs a reliable source. Ordinary authors who get blocked are no use to the publisher. They drive publishers around the bend. You know that. What they are looking for is a professional job of work from somebody who regards himself or herself as a professional writer. It's not cheating, as people have suggested, because you are giving a product. You are a professional writer. You're doing a job of work. That's what the publisher wants. And the impression I have is that most publishers, and I include large publishers in this, most publishers would rather be dealing with a professional who agrees what's to be done and then does it, agrees what they're going to be paid and gets paid that amount, and then goes off and does something else until the publisher next says, are you available? Isn't that what you find?
I get hired directly by clients, so I'm slightly different.
Ah, right. Right.
Yeah,
right. Now, I set out to, I sold my first book to a publisher in 1989. 1989, in fact, was a big year. It was my breakthrough year, because I also sold my first article to a magazine, Good Housekeeping, and my first short story to BBC Radio. And I'm so proud of that short story. It's actually on my website. It's called Bird. And you would need to know to understand that that in the UK, bird is also a slang word for a prison sentence, because this guy has done time. But he was a bird watcher. Now you don't need to listen to the story now, you know the whole story. So, and since then, and it did take a lot of time, since then I've set about saying to publishers, this is what I do, this is what I write, here's a portfolio, this is my stuff. Do you need anything like this? Now, an awful lot of people write back and say, no, we don't. We've got plenty of ghostwriters, don't need another one. Plenty of them, because this is the publishing business, and you know what it's like. Some of them never reply at all. But enough have come back and said, yeah. Usually you get a reply that says, haven't got anything right now, keep you on file. And you think, oh yes, heard that before. And then an email arrives, maybe 3 months later, maybe 2 years later. But an email arrives saying, are you interested in this? And the first question you ask is, how much?
Of course.
And when we've agreed that, because I calculate how much time this is going to take me. And I apply a notional hourly rate. And as long as I'm happy that I'm going to get properly remunerated for this, then I'd say, yeah. I mean, you get all kinds of ludicrous offers. Somebody asked me yesterday, not a publisher, a human being, asked me yesterday to write a 50,000 word book, a 50,000 word romance for $600.
I get that all the time.
Yeah. And I'm always very polite about it. I don't shout and rant and rave, but I do try to explain the facts of life.
Now, you're also self-published, correct?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Why did you choose to do that?
I had, before I got into writing full-time, I spent quite a lot of years in international sales. And I've lived and worked on every continent except South Africa, except Antarctica, excuse me. What's the matter? I have lived and worked in South Africa and in other parts of Africa. And I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And while I was in the Middle East, I met a woman in Abu Dhabi. And she was a writer, but the sort of stuff she writes, she couldn't let it be known in Abu Dhabi that she wrote that, because she'd be in serious trouble with the authorities. And she didn't know what to do about it. And it was her idea. She said, set up a publishing company. Let's do it 50-50.
Okay.
And I said, yeah, okay. And she said, you'll have to do all the admin, and you can have a share of my earnings. And I said, well, yeah, okay. And we did that, and it worked out just fine for a while. I had to learn about printing and all the majority of the books I read when I was a child were printed by a company called Clays, which is in Turner Bungay in Sussex. And I wanted my books to be printed by Clays. So I talked to Clays, and they said, yeah, we'll print your books. This is what it'll cost you. And they, of course, supply the one of the two wholesalers who supply libraries in this country and bookshops in this country. So I had to learn all about that, and I had to learn all about ebooks and how it was done. And I had to get involved with all the things the publisher should do for you. I had to get involved with cover designers, because the cover has to look good. If the cover doesn't look good, you're lost. However good the book may be, if the cover doesn't look good, you have it. And then I had to get involved with proofreaders and editors, because there's nothing worse than having somebody download an ebook or pick up a printed book, and they get as far as page 3 and they've already found four errors. They won't read. They won't read anymore. I certainly won't. So I had to get involved in all of that, and that was all. There was a big learning curve, and it took time. But I'm happy about it. Unfortunately, and I hope she watches this, we've had something of a falling out because she introduced another writer, and that writer writes things that I'm extremely unhappy with. And that's the kind of thing you have to look out for. So I am extracting myself from that venture.
Okay. Now, you're also a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors. Tell me a little bit about that.
I find them extremely useful for advice on all kinds of things. There's always somebody who knows. Any question you've got, there's always somebody who can answer it. It's one of the very few Facebook groups. It's not a Facebook group, but it is present on Facebook. It's one of the very few group pages you'll find on Facebook that sticks just to the point and isn't riven with all kinds of political dribble and point scoring and so on. There are some very good authors in the Alliance. One or two. Jane Davis is one name that I'd recommend, and Ali Bacon is another, and David Penny is another when it comes to historical fiction. David Penny looks a lot like you, by the way. When you come up on the screen, it will be very easy to think, hello, it's David. And they are excellent writers who would be very successful anywhere. I think one of the questions people often want an answer to is, well, why did you go down that road? Because, as I said, I sold my first book to a publisher in 1989. I had a book. It's called The Making of Billy McAlane. And one of the biggest publishers globally was interested in it and dithered and hovered for about 3 years. And in the end, I said, look, I can't wait any longer. You know, I'm not in the first flush of youth before this thing actually gets published. If you ever publish it, it will be, I'll be dead. And so I'm publishing it myself. I'm taking it away from you. I'm publishing it myself. And by the way, you're not getting your advance back. And I had a very similar experience with a historical fiction book at the same time, which had been accepted by the company that was then the #1 historical fiction publisher in the UK, who'd just been taken over. And they came along and said, you know that 80,000 word book we've accepted? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, we're not publishing anything over 50,000 words now, so you've got to take 30,000 words out. I said, I'm sorry, you're out of your mind. And I took the same approach with them. You're not getting your advance back. Neither of them argued. And the thing is, I mean, you look at people like, you know, David Penny has been published by traditional publishers. So has Jane Davies. So has Orna Ross. So have a number of other people. You have more control if you do it yourself. And there used to be a negative sort of idea about self-publishing. You know, oh, he publishes it himself because nobody else will take it on. But that is going because so many good books are self-published now. But there's a drawback to self-publishing, and I hate it when I come across it, and I come across it a lot. Somebody publishes their own book and they don't get it professionally proofread, and they don't get it professionally edited because they say they can't afford it. And my answer to that is, well, look, you're not going to sell any. And you're going to get some terrible reviews, because however much you think you can do your own editing and your own proofreading, you can't. I can edit other people's work, and I do. I find it very difficult to do a final edit of mine. I need somebody else to do that. So that's the downside of self-publishing. And the fact is, anybody can self-publish. And I'm not going to tell you any more than you're going to tell me that every self-published book out there is a treat to read and a masterpiece, because it wouldn't be true.
There's truth to that. And what do you like being about being an author? What when you get up in the morning, you think, I'm getting to write today? What motivates you?
You know, I said earlier that I was 40 odd years in international sales, and that's true. And I've been almost everywhere. And now I work at home, and this is where I am. And somebody said to me the other day, don't you get stir crazy being at home all the time? And I said, you're mad. I don't now have to wait for the car to pick me up and take me to Manchester Airport, right? I'm not going to sit on an aircraft for 7 hours as I fly to Abu Dhabi, or 10 hours as I fly to Nairobi, or 14 hours as I fly to Johannesburg. Even worse, if I'm going to New Zealand or Australia, I don't have to do that. I spend my day at home, and I'm in 18th century France, I'm in 18th century America, I'm in present day UK. When I wrote The Making of Billy McAlane, you know, he does a trip across America from Boston to Seattle, and having one or two interesting adventures in places like Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, and becoming more and more amazed at what he encounters. I can do all that, and then I can go downstairs and make a sandwich for lunch.
Yeah, I understand. Believe me.
Yeah.
Do you have any copies of your book sitting around that we could see?
I can lay hands easily enough on two.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah, that works.
Right, butterfly. Can you see that? Okay. And this is Zappa's Man's a Slapper, which was renamed The Making of Billy McAlane. This one here, look at that cover. I wrote this book about a woman called Sharon Wright. It's called Sharon Wright Butterfly. And the tagline is, no one gives Sharon a chance except Sharon. And I fell in love with this woman as I was writing this book. Now, falling in love with Sharon would be a very stupid thing to do, because when Sharon loves, she loves the way a female mantis might, knowing that when she's done, the male may have to die. Okay? Nevertheless, I fell in love with Sharon as I was writing the book. And then when we were talking about covers, I didn't know what. And then somebody sent me a picture, and that is the picture, that woman. I'm holding it up to the wrong place there. And I looked at that picture and I thought, oh my God, that's her. That's my Shazza. It's her. It was just so perfect. She's out there somewhere. But if I were you, if you see her, walk straight by, because she is dangerous. But she's a great girl. And I wrote that actually because I wanted a counterweight to The Making of Billy McAlane. The Making of Billy McAlane, Zappa's Man's a Slapper. That is a book, it's a coming of age book about a young man. And I wanted, from a very poor background, and I wanted to write a book about a young woman from an equally deprived background, deprived in her case in cultural and all sorts of other ways. That's what I wanted. And both of them, both Billy McElwain and Sharon Wright, both of them, like me, I suppose, were determined to get out of the life they'd been born into and find another one. Because when there's a story I didn't tell you when we're talking about how you get to be where you are. I'll tell it to you now. When I was very small, visiting visiting relatives in County Durham who were still coal miners, and like many coal miners at that time, lived in a house with an outside lavatory, something in the north of England, northeast of England, we call a netty. Anybody from the northeast of England ever says netty, that's what they're talking about. It's an outside lavatory, okay? I don't suppose there are very many of them around now, but there were still at that time. And in fact, the house I grew up in was the first house for both of my parents where they'd had one indoors. All right. And that's just how it was. And I have a memory of being about 3 years old, sitting on this outdoor lavatory belonging to this relative with the door open and my pants around my ankles. And I'm quite sure that people walking past, and people did walk past, they must have thought, look at that disgusting little boy. But that disgusting little boy wasn't a disgusting little boy. He was driving a gypsy caravan down a dusty road to somewhere new. And it's what I always want to do, so it's why I traveled. I had this, I mean, at the age of 21, my first job, I was in the Bahamas. After that, I was in Africa, and so on and so on and so on. Always wanted to do that, was determined to, and that's what I wanted to give these two characters. Billy, Sharon, neither of them is born with exactly a silver spoon, but they both have this desire for a better life, and they both have an idea how to get it. In Sharon's case, that involves men suffering some grievous blows. I won't go into the blows. If anybody wants to know about that, they can read the book. But with Billy, it's different. That's what I wanted to do, and it's what I did. And I still think about that little boy with his gypsy caravan. And I imagine that all those people who walked past him, disgusting little boy, I imagine they're all dead now, so it doesn't matter, does it?
All right. Well, this has been a fun talk. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank anybody who has listened this long. I think what writers are engaged in is the same thing as what everybody else is engaged in. It's an adventure that starts with birth and only ends one way, right? And as a friend of mine, a guy I was at school with, and that was a very long time ago, as he said a while ago, it might be next week, it might not be for 30 years, but that's the downward slope we're on. That's the end we're looking at. And I've had a fabulous time getting this far. And I hope you and your watchers, your viewers, have the same. Because it's not a dress rehearsal.
There's truth to that. Well, thank you, John. We've been talking to John Lynch. If you want to hear more on this channel, this is a bi-weekly podcast. So hit the subscribe button and you'll automatically be seeing these podcasts in your inbox. Thank you very much, John. And you have a great day.
Thank you, and you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
That's a cut. Thank you.
All right.